Welcome to the Your Audio Solutions podcast, episode 3. Today we had the great drummer Gavin Harrison. If you're into progressive rock or metal or just awesome drumming in general, you probably heard about Gavin before. He played in bands like Porcupine Tree and King Crimson and Pineapple Thief. And when he was younger, he played with Iggy Pop for some time. In this interview, we talked about Gavin's early influences, what it takes to be a professional drummer, what it means to be playing in time. And actually, Gavin has an app coming out with the aim of helping you improve your time. It's like a game thing. You can hear it in the interview. So definitely keep an eye out for that. Gavin also gives us an insight to how he likes to record himself in the studio and how he experiments with his big live room. We also spoke about his thoughts on using drum replacements and why he doesn't like engineers to mix his drum recordings and some other cool tips for you to improve your drum sound. We also spoke about why it's important to take every job seriously and play your absolute best because you never know where it can take you, even if you don't like the music. It actually doesn't matter if you're a musician, engineer, producer. Every job you get, take it seriously because you never know where it can lead, basically. There are a lot of nuggets you can pick up from this episode, so I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. But before we jump into the conversation with Gavin, I want to tell you about a new free guide you can download for free on youraudiosolutions.com. It's called 3 Tested Ways to Increase Your Client Base. So if you're a home studio owner or professional audio engineer, but you're struggling with finding clients, or you want to build relationships and find more artists to work with, or maybe you're struggling what to say or write to bands to make them come back to you, then this guide is for you. In it, you can learn my tested email script that will help you start talking to new clients online. Also, a technique I call the coffee technique, which has landed me many great opportunities in recording studios and elsewhere around London. Is a really, really great way. Rather than asking for a job, you ask them out for perhaps a coffee or drink and get to know the person. Is a great way to find opportunities. You can also learn what you can do to make clients coming back for more work and a lot more. So go get it. It's on youraudiosolutions.com. You'll find it there. But yeah, now over to Gavin. So if we can start where you grew up, sorry, not where you grew up, but I know you grew up listening to Steve Gadd and drummers like Steve Gadd, Jeff Porcaro, John Robinson. I was just wondering, why were they so inspirational to you when you started out?
My father was a musician, so the kind of drummers that my father liked were drummers that he liked the feel of their time. And my father used to work in a nightclub in London called the Talk of the Town. My father was a trumpet player. And many times the Talk of the Town was a sort of London 60s, 70s, Las Vegas style cabaret club. And they would have visiting stars come in like, Diana Ross, Stevie Wonder, Mel Torme, and they would quite often bring their own drummer with them. And my dad would come home and tell me, the effect it had on the big band having a certain drummer. And it was always about the feel and the time more than anything, technical. And I got attracted to that kind of, the drummer making the music feel good, much more than drummers with lots and lots of technique that it's very impressive,
Yeah, because certainly you have awesome technique nowadays, or if you have for a long time, I guess. So what made you actually practicing the technique part? I mean, I guess you have to as a drummer at some point.
Yeah, you've got to at some point. I mean, technique really is about control and more than speed, because you're often asked to play things that, might not feel incredibly comfortable to you at first. You might want to play them a lot faster. You might want to, play them in a different way. But the technique really is about learning control and keeping things even and keeping things dynamically correct, and and keeping things in time. So I could see that practicing technique was really a way of being able to control certain urges that you might want to speed up or slow down during. For instance, everyone, when they're young, they might be able to play a beat, and then when it comes to the fill on bar 8 or bar 16 or something, they normally speed up because they get really excited and they lose control of the time. So that was something that I wanted to at least try to get a grasp of.
Right, that makes sense. But so when you were a kid playing drums, what were some of your first gigs? Was it pubs and stuff?
My first gigs, well, a few of my early experiences were playing with my dad and his friends and his bands, which was usually a jazz thing. So, when I was 12, 13, my dad would go along to pubs and sit in with jazz groups, and he would say, "Hey, listen, my son's a drummer. Could he sit in?" And then I would sit in and play 2 or 3 songs. But it was old style jazz music, that kind of thing.
How old were you when you started playing with Iggy Pop? You must have been way older then, right?
Yep, I was 23 when I played with Iggy Pop.
How was that experience?
Well, pretty wild. I
Yeah.
mean, I was aware of Iggy Pop because, in the late 70s when I was at school, the whole punk revolution thing happened, especially in London. So I knew who Iggy Pop was. I can't say I was a fan of his music because I was coming from, a jazz place.
Hmm.
But by 1986, I needed work, and I heard that Iggy Pop was auditioning drummers in London. So I thought, well, I'll give it my best shot. And I went out, I found out the 2 songs that he was doing in the audition. They were on 2 different albums, unfortunately. So I went out and bought the 2 vinyl albums. I listened to the 2 songs. I learnt the arrangement of the 2 songs. And it was quite out of character for me to play that kind of music. But, I went down to the audition and gave it my best shot. And he said, "Okay, you've got the job."
Nice. And then was just on the road, or did you also record with him, or it was just a tour back then?
No, it was just a tour. It's about a 9-week tour. I
Right.
think there's one of the concerts is on YouTube, or you might find it, from 1986.
Yeah, I saw some of it. It was quite cool, actually.
Yeah, I got some pretty funny hair going on in that one.
Yeah.
It
It
was
was cool, actually.
1986. What can I tell you?
Yeah. But nice. So you were 23 touring with Iggy Pop. Was that US or was it UK? I think the clip I saw was from US, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
no, it was about 4 or 5 weeks around the States and about maybe 3 or 4 weeks around Europe, in my memory.
Right. And how was it for you playing punk rock, I guess, coming from a jazz
Uh,
background?
I'd grown up learning to play a lot of different styles, and they've all got some things in common. You're required to hold the time. You're required to play the musical style with the right kind of attitude. So I wasn't unfamiliar with punk. I just hadn't played much punk. But if you want to be a professional musician, you've got to be really versatile. Otherwise, you're never going to make it past the first few years of trying to get employment where no one knows who you are, you haven't got a name, and you're just one of many, 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 many drummers living in London trying to get work. So if the job is offered to you, you need to try your best to come up with the right type of drumming for that job. Whether it, sometimes I played in calypso bands, sometimes I played reggae, sometimes I played funk, sometimes I played, in wedding bands. I used to dep in shows in London, playing with a small orchestra with a conductor, reading charts. If you want to survive as a professional musician, you've got to really be as adaptable as possible and try to play as many different things as you can convincingly.
Yeah, so because I actually want to ask you about that later on, but we can delve into that now. So, you said about being a professional drummer, and you mentioned a lot of stuff right now, but what else does it mean to you to be a professional drummer?
Well, you need to be kind of conscientious. So if you've got the chance to go and listen, if someone says, look, do you want to play with this artist? If you want to do it, then you should do some homework. Go and listen to their music, learn their music, understand the style, the sort of drum sound they're going to expect. And, to be a conscientious person who turns up and can play the stuff right from the beginning. I saw lots of, examples of musicians turning up unprepared and going home at the end of the first day because they really hadn't bothered to learn the music or, be prepared for that kind of music. There were occasions, of course, where I was really thrown in the deep end and put in positions that I was very unfamiliar with, but I tried my best to just do what I could and get through the job.
Yeah, that makes total sense, man. And preparation is key, Doesn't matter what you really do. If you're an engineer, musician, seems to come down to that factor a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you said, learning, obviously, you're a drummer, so learning songs is key, So what have you found being, or what have you found being the easiest way to learn a bunch of songs?
Oh, you've got to be able to read.
Right.
So there were many times in my career where I would have like maybe a day's warning. Someone would say, listen, can you do this job on Sunday night? And it's Saturday morning. The drummer might phone me and say that he's ill or something. And, or I might have been sent in those days a cassette or something. And so you need to be able to transcribe drum parts really fast and accurate, and then be able to go on stage and read those charts without making a mistake. And lots and lots and lots of jobs were like that. So I learnt lots of sets, of playing with different people by listening to cassettes and writing out charts that I could take on stage and play to. If you want to be professional drummer, then you're going to really cut off a lot if you have not learned to read and transcribe. You're going to really limit yourself a lot.
Yeah.
And, it's a miracle making a living out of playing the drums or being in the music business. If you can make a living out of playing the drums, then that alone is quite an amazing achievement. So give yourself, as many chances as possible.
Yeah, totally, man. And how did that, because playing in all those various shows and things, music styles, or, as you said, if it was the West End, how did that affect your playing?
How did it affect my playing? Well, most of those times you're just required to play, the bare minimum. They're not looking for people who are going to steal the show or try to take over the job. They were pretty background type jobs where you were just required to play the basic part. They weren't looking for, Billy Cobham or something. They weren't looking for some crazy double bass drum fills. this was show music or dance music or pop music, that you just needed to be a solid drummer. So being able to read, not make mistakes, and play in time was really the three things that could not fail.
Yeah, totally. So, because I've heard you speak about playing in time on many interviews I listened to, preparing for this interview. What does it mean for you to play in time? Because, I think I heard you speaking about, for example, you play with King Crimson now, and you have 3 drummers sometimes. So that's a huge thing for everyone to play in time. But what does it mean to you?
What does it mean to me? Well, I mean, it's I think there's an acceptable level of accuracy that most musicians would say, yeah, that guy's got good time. I mean, it depends how hard you're listening, of course. If you measure it against a computer, which people do nowadays, no one has perfect time. No one in the world. But you can hear drummers who you think, oh, yeah, that feels good, or that feels steady. And the other musicians, certainly, the other musicians in the band can easily tell, because they've got to play with you. Now, if you've got to play guitar or bass or trumpet or something along with a drummer, your job's going to be 10 times harder if that drummer is, let's say, going out of time, speeding up during drum fills, slowing down during verses. Every time it gets loud, it gets faster. Every time it gets quiet, the drummer goes slower. It's very hard to play your instrument along with that. So on a sort of superficial level, you just need to be able to keep it steady, make it predictable, and for people to enjoy playing with you, because, you kind of put the beats in the right place at the right moment. Measuring it on a more sort of atomic level, playing with clicks, looking at wave files on computer screens, you do start to understand how good or bad humans can be, and how accurate some people think they are against other people. And it depends how good your ears are at hearing how in time you are. Some people have got very, very sensitive ears to timing, and they'll tell you something's out of time, and you might think, sounds fine to me.
Yeah.
And that happened, in my early years. I would make sessions and producers would say, this bit didn't feel good, or this bit sped up. And I'd think, you're crazy. I can't hear it. Years later, I could hear it. So your time is only really as good as your hearing, and how good you are at recognizing when things are in the right place or not.
Right. And what would you say is a good practice to become better at that skill?
Yeah, that's a good question, because lots of musicians don't really bother with that part, especially people who don't play drums, because they've got other things to worry about. They've got chords, they've got scales, they've got, melodic things to think about, and their timing might be one of the last things they ever think about. If you're a keyboard player or something, or a guitar player, and you're thinking about the fingering and the notes and the strings and the chords and all those things, your timing might be something that you haven't spent a lot on. And you might start feeling like you think you sound really good. And to someone else, they with more sensitive hearing might say, Christ, that guitar's so out of time. And the guitar player's totally unaware of it. So it is a difficult thing. There isn't lots of tutorials on how to improve your hearing to do with timing. And funny enough, I've spent the last 2 or 3 years working with a guy in the States called Terry Branham, and we've built an app.
Cool.
That will come out soon, which is a game, and it presents you with timing issues, and you have to guess from 3 possibilities if you thought it was early, late, or perfect, or in another game, if it sped up, it slowed down, or it was perfect. So you start training your ears to notice small increments of timing issues. And it's kind of strange because people never, ever really practice that kind of thing, or lots of people don't.
That's a really cool idea, man. Looking forward to getting it when it's out.
Yeah, I mean, I studied the David L. Burge course back in the 90s to do with perfect pitch and relative pitch. And there are lots and lots of tutorials and things probably you'll find on YouTube of people showing you how to recognize intervals, how to name intervals. If I play this note followed by that note, can you name what that interval is? And you train your ears to recognize intervals. And in another course, you can train your ears to recognize perfect pitch. And I thought, well, there should be something like this for timing, but there just isn't.
Yeah, totally.
So our little app that will probably come out later this year is literally that. It's so ridiculously sort of childish, but it's something that people's ears, until you can recognize something, you can never do anything about it. You know, especially in real time. You know, I used to record every concert I ever did on my Walkman, and then I'd listen back to it the next day and realize some things and think, wow, I didn't notice that I sped up during that drum fill. Why didn't I notice that when I did it? So I would analyze what I did and think, I've got to be able to get hold of this in real time. It's no good listening the next day and saying, oh, that song sped up. That's 12 hours too late.
Yeah.
You need to be able to, it's like you're riding a bicycle down a dead straight white line. You need to be able to see, or in this case, hear when you deviate. And when you deviate a little bit, you can pull it back immediately. Don't wait till you've gone meters and meters and meters away from the white line to think, oh my God, I've really slowed down. And I think you'll find that drummers who do have really good time are going down this virtual white line and making very, very small corrections all the time. If it goes ahead, they pull it back. If it goes behind, they pull it forward. But they catch it so quickly, from a distance, it looks like they're just going perfectly smooth in a perfectly straight white line without wavering, without quivering. More amateur musicians would really, you would notice it even from a distance. You would see them weaving left and right of a white line, let's say.
Yeah. But maybe, because when I'm thinking here, because when oftentimes, when you hear people talk about older records, I should say, there's also this romantic, well, not romantic is the right word, but like people usually talk about how they sped up and sped down and how that was a good thing. And that today we're all on a grid. So maybe that goes back to what you talked about the line. So maybe they're still within the line, but it's still going slightly up and down within that line, maybe.
I think the drummers, you know, our ears have got better because coming through the 80s, listening to drum machines, and for the first time ever, hearing things that were kind of perfectly in time, let's say. But the drummers before that time, in the 60s and 70s, I don't believe they were trying to speed up and slow down in certain sections. I just think they were trying their best to hold it steady. And what you are now hearing by listening to that record 30, 40 years later with much better ears, you can hear them speeding up and slowing down much easier than they could at that time. So it was only when we got to the 80s that we started measuring time against computers. But before that time, you know, it did have an organic flow, and some records, you know, just feel great. If you analyze them with an app like Live BPM, you will see that they move up and down, but it still feels great. So it's not to get confused between something that feels great and perfect computerized time.
Right.
They are two different things.
Yeah.
Things can speed up and slow down and still feel great. And things can speed up and slow down and feel horrible.
Yeah.
So the feel thing is something else. And that quite often is the relationship between the drummer, the bass player, and all the rhythm players in the band having an agreement about where the time is going and all feeling it together. A good example is Earth, Wind and Fire. If you listen to any Earth, Wind and Fire song, they feel great. They feel absolutely fantastic. You start tapping your feet, you want to get up and dance. But they're not necessarily, well, none of them are in perfect time.
Right.
But it feels great because everyone's moving together, and it's a good feeling between the rhythm section. Let's say the drummer, the bass player, and the guitar player, and quite often the singers too. You know, it's very rhythmical singing in Earth, Wind and Fire, and it's feeling great with the drums and the bass and the guitars.
Yeah. So do you think, so if you did analyze one of those songs, you would see that it was fluctuating, so to speak?
Oh yeah, absolutely,
Right. But
absolutely.
right. But if it was just a drummer, you would hear something is off.
If it was just the drummer, well, yeah, you might notice it more if you were just listening to the drum track. You might
Right.
think, oh, that bit sped up a bit. But when you hear the whole mix with all the band, you know, I don't think the human ear is good at hearing everything at the same time. I think the human ear dances from listening to the drums, listening to the vocal, listening to the melody. Oh, that's a nice bass sound. Oh, I like that guitar rhythm. Oh, that's an interesting keyboard sound. That's a really nice bass drum sound. I like, what's that rhythm he's playing? And I think your ears are constantly moving around and listening to lots of things. That's why when you listen to the same record 100 times, you quite often hear different things. I
Yeah.
listen to records that I've listened to for 30 years, and I start to notice things I hadn't noticed before. There might be things you enjoy more. You might be listening to a record with Steve Gadd on, and your ears just can't stop listening to Steve Gadd and thinking, oh, I love what he's doing there. And you might not notice what the bass player did in that section
Mhm.
or even what the lyrics are. So I don't think the ears are anywhere like the way that you perceive things with your eyes. Your eyes are a totally different sense, and your ears hear things in quite selective ways, let's say.
Yeah, totally, man. No, I love hearing records that you think you know, and you go back, and then it's like, shit, I didn't know this guy was doing this. Like you said,
Mm,
that's a sign of a great record, I think.
yeah,
Um, but I know you. Can I say you're also an engineer, or because I know you record drums at home, right? We
I
had
guess
a
I guess I'm a default engineer. Yeah,
yeah. Because I'm really interested in drummers like yourself who also knows how to record themselves. Um, just how you how you or what your process is when you do record drums.
yeah.
In comparison to an engineer like myself. Um, so what are you looking for when you record yourself, as in terms of sound, or what's your thought process as a drummer recording yourself?
I know what I want the drums to sound like, so I play the drums the way I want them to sound. They're tuned the way I want them to sound. So when I listen back to the recording, I'm searching for that sound. It could be the balance, it could be the EQ, it could be the room, it could be any number of things that are stopping that sound coming through, the raw sound that I think I want to hear. And it could change from song to song and artist to artist, or whatever band I'm playing in. I might want a different snare drum sound in one band and a different in another band. And when I normally do recordings in my studio, obviously I have it all set up, ready to go. And the first thing I do, I listen to the song. I listen to the song without whatever demo drums or drum machine is in there. And I try to imagine, what would I like to hear on this song? What drum rhythm would I like to hear? And what sounds? And that might immediately make me think, I'm going to try this ride cymbal or I'm going to change the hi-hats, or I'm going to tune the snare drum up, or any number of those things. Or I might feature more of the room mics and less of the close mics. So I normally, after the first take, where before I've even written out a chart or even understand the song structure, I'll go and have a quick play through it, and immediately I'll try to mix it. Because if the bass drum sound isn't working, or the hi-hat sound isn't working, or anything isn't working, I should change it now, not in 4 hours' time when I'm really deep into this song and I've already done a few takes. So I might even do 2 or 3 takes and then think, no, this snare drum is not working the way I want it to work in this mix. So I might scrap all of that, put up a different snare drum, tune it differently, and do another take, and then compare them and think, is this better? Yeah, this is where I want to go. This snare drum's now sounding better. What I think is too loud is the ride cymbal. So I'm going to change the ride cymbal for a different ride cymbal and maybe play it a bit lighter, because, you've got to play the mix the way you want it to sound. If you want the hi-hats loud, hit the hi-hats hard. You can't just turn them up. If you turn them up, you'll hear lots of other things on that hi-hat mic. The drums aren't a drum machine. They're not. Everything is bleeding into every other mic. So if you listen back and think, the snare drum's too quiet, you might be able to turn it up a little bit, but then the hi-hat starts to get loud, and then other things start getting in the snare drum mic. You're better off going to play the whole thing again and just hit the snare drum harder to get the closest to a mix whilst you're playing is really the key way to go. There are obviously a million tricks you can do with EQ and compression and reverb and all that stuff. But if what you're starting off with is not great, you're going to be chasing your tail round in circles, because it'll always sound duff. It'll always sound wrong, even though you've tried to replace this and manage that and EQ this. In the end, it won't be as good as you doing it all again with the right sounds and the right mix.
Yeah, that makes sense. But so when you spoke about the snare drum, for example, if it's not working, could you give us an example of a situation like that? What is it that you're listening for specifically on a snare drum?
Well, it depends what other instruments are playing. If you're doing a metal track and there's tracked up metal guitars, you're going to have a hard time, because that, a distorted guitar playing in a metal style takes up a lot of frequencies, and it's about frequencies. If the middle frequencies are totally full of distorted guitar, you're going to have a lot of trouble getting a snare drum to come through that. So it might need to be higher pitched. It might need to be really, really bright to come through the guitars. If it was a different track with just piano, then that, a really bright, high-pitched snare drum might not work. It's very mix dependent how the drums sound. There's many times I've recorded my drums and I've thought, wow, the bass drum sounds incredible. And then I bring in the bass guitar and the keyboards and the vocals and the guitar, and my bass drums disappeared. They've literally eaten up the frequencies where that bass drum was sounding good. So now, if the bass and the keyboards and everything are going to be at that level on the track, well, then this bass drum sound is not going to work. So I need to find a different solution. It's difficult sometimes, because sometimes you're sent demos to work on where it's not the final guitar, it's not the final keyboards, it's not the final bass. And the bass sound and the bass drum need to work together. So I might adjust my bass drum sound to work with their demo bass. It might even be a bass synth. And then when they send me the record, they've changed the bass synth for a bass guitar, and it's not working.
Yeah.
So it is a constantly moving target, and the only way you end up on the record with a really good sound is to be involved in the mix right from the beginning to the end, including the mastering. to make sure that it doesn't get lost. Your original vision of that sound inside that mix is not lost by the time it's the finished CD, let's say.
Yeah, yeah. What are your thoughts about mixing engineers adding drum replacements on snare and kick, for example? Is that something you welcome, or you rather stay away?
No, I'd rather they didn't. I mean, I sometimes supplement the bass drum with bass drum samples, but you can always hear the real bass drum in there as well. I never add samples to the snare drum. If you need to add samples to the snare drum, then it wasn't the right snare drum in the first place. I can add little samples of kick to the bass drum sound because I can see the way the mix is moving, and the bass player's done a new take and he's used a different bass and a different EQ. And now I'm thinking, well, I don't really want to re-record my drums, but now I'm going to have to add some kind of bass drum sample to make my bass drum kind of work in the mix. I generally, and when I say generally, I mean 99% of the time, I hate other people mixing my drums because they're not me. They don't understand what I was trying to play with that style of mix. It's happened many times to me, of course, where I've handed over a multi-track of my drums and then they've sent me a mix and they've completely destroyed my drum sound and the way that I was playing it. If the drum sound you wanted was like the one that you've sent me back in your mix, I would have played something completely different. So, you know, for the last few years, I've just been sending stereo mixes of my drums to when someone asks me to do a session, because I don't want them to remix my drums. They will never get it exactly the way that I intended. The mix and the performance are absolutely one and the same thing. If you change the drum mix, you know, if you replace John Bonham's live drumming with 808 samples, it will absolutely destroy it. The drumming will be identical, but now you're hearing 808 drum machine samples triggered off John Bonham, and of course it will sound terrible.
Yeah.
The sound and the performance are all knitted very closely interweaved with each other, and you can't really change it that much.
No, but do you ever get complaints from a mixing engineer in that case, who specifically asks for a multi-track or?
Yep, because lots and lots of engineers like to do drums. They love doing drums. It's their favorite thing, and they really want to play with it. But I don't want them to play with it, and I don't want a mastering engineer to play with it either, because you can ruin a drum sound in mastering so quickly. And I've been witness to that many times. So, you know, yeah, you've got to be a control freak. If you've got a great drum sound and you want to hang on to it and make sure that that great drum sound ends up on the record at the end, you're going to have to be pretty control freak about it to stay with it.
Yeah, I mean, if that's, you know, your vision, you know, definitely go for it. I think, you know, this shouldn't be, I mean, it's you guys creating the art in the end. The engineers should be there to serve you, I think.
Yeah, sure. I mean, having moaned all that, I have worked with lots of great engineers, and I learned a lot by watching engineers sitting next to them. I would sit in the control room, watch what they do, see how they work, see what it was doing to my drums. I would go home and try similar things, I would buy the same microphones sometimes. I would do a session and I would think, wow, the drums sounded great. I'm going to go home and buy those mics and put them on my drums and see if I can get that as well.
Yeah, yeah. But something I noticed recording drums is you're so dependent on the room you're recording in. That's almost
Absolutely.
the main aspect of getting a good drum sound.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have you done any special treatment to your room or?
I play in what is the control room. So it's pretty dead, almost reflection free in the control room. Now I'm very lucky because I've got a room in the center, just outside the control room, I've got a massive live room. It's like a church hall.
Cool.
And so I play with these enormous doors open, and the drum sound is in the control room with close mics, is like a normal, dead, close mic drum sound. And then out in the ambient big room, I've got a pair of 414 AKGs, and I can set the pattern. They've got 9 patterns on them from, hypercardioid, very directional cardioid direction, right through to omni, picking up from the front and the back and the sides and picking up the whole room. So with that pattern, I can change what appears to be the size of the room. And that's something I might do right early on when I'm listening to the song. If it's quite a quiet song, it doesn't need big, aggressive ambient room, I might close down the room on the pattern on the microphone. So the microphones aren't hearing front and back, they're just hearing front and quite directional, and it makes the room feel smaller. But I've had this studio for 22 years, so I've done a lot of experimenting, and I'm very, very, very familiar with this ambient room.
Yeah, for sure.
But even having a small amount of the ambience in, if I was going for a dead, dry drum sound, I would still use a little bit, a tiny bit of the ambient room, because when you bypass it, it just all goes flat.
Yeah.
But it gives it a space, and it's real reverb. Mm-hmm. Experiencing real reverb against digital reverb is quite an amazing thing. Obviously, I've got lots of digital reverbs inside my inside Logic on my computer, and when you hear digital reverbs against a real live room, it's really quite noticeable difference.
Yeah, totally, man. So what is your thought about compression? How do you think about compression? Do you use it in your studio?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I never record the compression. Okay. It's only in post-production.
Right. And what is your thinking process when you add compression? What are you looking to do?
Well, it depends on the settings. Sometimes I compress the big room. If I want a really aggressive drum sound, I can compress the large room. But when I do that, if I really, really compress it, the cymbals absolutely explode and take your head off. Now, if that's a sound that I think is going to work on a particular song, I will record the song and not play any cymbals. And then I will overdub the cymbals on a separate track so I don't crush them in the same reverb as the room. The bass drum and snare drum and toms might sound fantastic while they're being totally crushed in a sort of distressor type compressor, but when you hit a crash cymbal, it's going to be horrible. So if early on, when I'm listening to a song, I think, yeah, I want that super aggressive drum sound, then I'll probably do the take without any cymbals. I mean, I'll play the hi-hat, I might play the ride cymbal, but I certainly won't hit any crash cymbals or China cymbals. All of those will be overdubbed.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Purely for sound purposes.
Yeah. But that's a cool thing, actually. I bet you can do some cool things with that afterwards, since you have them separated, not only for sound purpose.
Yeah. If I recorded the drums out there in the live room, the reverb would be all over the place.
Yeah.
Even on the local, the close mics, you would hear it. So having it separate is actually something really, really useful. I know there's been lots of instances, where drummers recorded in quite dead circumstances, and the powerful reverb was actually another room. And it's the treatment of that room sound that gives the drums the power.
Yeah, exactly, man. That's awesome. So is there any beyond the room you have and the different techniques? Is there any other cool recording technique you have come up with in your own studio?
Yeah, actually, there's a plugin called Auto Align, which I always use. Auto Align is something that will check and correct all the phase and the delays. So, my room mics that are out in the ambient room are maybe 5 or 6 meters away from the drums. So, as you can imagine, if I turn those up loud, there's quite a noticeable delay in respect to the local mics. And with Auto Align, you can, right down to the sample, take out the distance, take out the delay and the lag. So, and that's true also of all the other mics, the way that the snare drum mic, the distance from the snare drum mic to the snare drum head might be, 5 centimeters, but the tom mics are all different distance from the snare drum, but they're all still hearing the snare drum, of course. And if you auto align all the toms to the snare drum mic, it makes a very big difference to your sound. It really puts things in focus. You might not realize it until you do it, and then you bypass it and think, wow, what I had before that plugin was kind of out of focus.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, man. Yeah, it's amazing what phase can do to your sound,
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very big part of a drum sound, especially when you've got 15 drum mics. They're all going to be phasing against each other to different degrees and different levels. And if you can experiment with that with a plugin like Auto Align, you can improve your drum sound quite a lot just through that.
Yeah, for sure, man. And do you also program any drums? Is that something you have done throughout the years?
Not really.
Right.
Not really. I mean, there have been moments where I've thought I would like a really, really, really industrial electronic drum thing happening here. And of course, I would possibly program, a 1 or 2 bar loop. I might even play a 1 or 2 bar loop and then do some really crazy effects to a drum mix. Put all sorts of distortion and flanging and weird stuff, pitch shifting to make that drum kit not sound like a drum kit and sound like it's coming through a telephone or something. But that was only just for, an effect for 8 bars somewhere. 99% of what I do is playing real drums.
Right. Yeah, I just want to ask if you had any tips or tricks on how to make programmed drums sound more human. Maybe you do anyway, actually.
Well, get a human to play them.
Yeah, makes sense. So if you are recording in a studio when you're not recording yourself, what can we as engineers do to make drummers feel as comfortable as possible in a studio?
Well, having a good headphone mix is really crucial. It's very hard to have a good mix from a drummer point of view. If you're playing keyboards, the keyboards don't make any sound at all in themselves. So it's very easy for a keyboard player to have a mix, which is almost like listening to, a CD. But when you play the drums, even with in-ear monitors in, even with studio headphones on, the drums themselves are so loud, possibly the snare drum itself is making 120 dB. There's no way you're going to have a beautiful mix in your headphones. You might need to be playing to a click, so you need separate control of that. So it always sounds pretty hard to get a drum mix which you want to play with. Making the drums sound nice, having reverb on the drums all helps you play. But here in my studio, of course, I've had a 22-year sound check, so drums kind of sound exactly like I want them to. If someone else was listening to my drum mix as I was playing, you would probably think that's horrible. But, you know, you're not sitting there with a very loud instrument blasting off in your face the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you sat on the floor with your head pressed up against a guitar amp and then tried to make a good mix, you know, it's impossible.
Yeah.
But that's what it's like playing the drums and trying to listen at the same time.
Right. So do you prefer to have individual controls of all the different drums in so you can control the headphone mix, or you want as little drums as possible? Did I understand you correctly?
It depends. I mean, I've been in so many studio situations where I just thought, oh, this sounds so horrible. I don't even know where to start, because you're telling a guy, you know, through a piece of glass who's sitting behind a console, can I have a bit more of this, a bit more of that? Now, he's looking at a knob, you know, what does a bit more mean?
Yeah.
What's that? A quarter turn, a half turn, all the way round, a tiny, tiny touch? I don't know.
Mm.
It's probably better if you can do it yourself.
Yeah.
Now I'm using a system where I can mix my headphone mix from an iPad whilst I'm sitting at the drums hitting them. And I can tell how much is a little bit. If I want a little bit more bass drum, I can push a fader up on my iPad whilst I'm playing the bass drum and think, oh, okay, that's what I'm expecting. But telling someone else, an engineer who's sitting in another room, what you want in your headphones it's pretty hard. It's always a massive compromise.
Yeah. It is, man. But yeah, that's a good thing though, to let the drummer decide, I guess, and just give him everything on a pair of faders, hopefully, or an
Yeah,
iPad, you know,
up to
and
about 15 years ago, it was impossible. But then I started going in studios and they would have little sub mixers
exactly.
where at least you've got control over the track, over the click. Maybe you can put the bass drum on one channel, the snare drum on another channel, the overhead, you know, and do at least a very tiny sort of sub mix whilst you're sitting at the drums.
Yeah.
20, 30 years ago, those kind of little sub mixers didn't really exist.
Right. Yeah. Then it was telling the engineer behind the glass
Yeah.
style. Yeah. Yeah, that's cool, man. Actually, leaving the recording side a bit, I read this quote. I hope it's a correct quote from you. Um, but you said that you view success, or sorry, you said I view success in happiness. So
Mm,
if you're happy, then you're successful.
yeah.
If you measure everything in numbers, you'll never be happy because the numbers will never be big enough.
Mm.
So was there a time when you did measure success by numbers?
I don't know. I didn't really think about it. You know, for at least the first 20 years of my career, I was just focused on trying to survive, trying to actually survive playing the drums for a living. So you don't really get to choose exactly what you want to play. You don't get to choose who you want to work with. It's just literally about trying to earn money and survive. And then I guess, you know, 20 odd years ago, I started considering more what I was playing and the type of music I was playing and the kind of people I was working with, and if I really was enjoying it. You know, if you'd have asked me when I was, you know, playing on shows in the pits in the theatres of London, it was really about just trying to do a good job and feel satisfied that you got through the job. You didn't make any mistakes. If someone said to you, do you actually enjoy playing this music? You'd have said, well, no, of course not.
Yeah.
This is absolute rubbish. I wouldn't listen to this in a million years. But it was a job. So it was a different mentality about being professional. And probably for the last 20 years, I've thought more about what I'm actually doing, what I'm actually playing, what am I doing with my life? What's the point of actually doing this? Is there any satisfaction in it? It's not about just going on tour and coming home and counting out how much money you've made. Did you actually enjoy playing it? Was there any musical satisfaction to what you were doing, and therefore happiness? You know, you might do a job that pays a lot less than another job, but you love it. You think the music's great. You like the guys in the band, and you're really enjoying it. You're a much happier human than going home and thinking, well, I've got a bit more money than playing this other job, you know.
Yeah. But I guess that's the hard thing when you do start out is you are so dependent on numbers in a way, you know, because you need to pay rent, or
Yeah,
whatever, you know.
you've got to survive. You've got bills, you know. You've got to pay the rent. You've got to pay for the car. You've got to pay for the gas. You've got to pay for everything. Until you get to the point where you can easily pay all those things, then you can start steering your career. The only way you can steer your career is when you have the luxury of saying no to some things.
Yeah, exactly.
For the first few decades, you just have to say yes to everything, no matter how horrible it is. You just have to say yes to everything because it's money. And later on in life, if you've reached a lucky position, you can start to say, no, I don't want to do that.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. But did you ever, so when you did experience those tougher times, so to speak, when you had to pay rent and all that sort of things, um, how was that? Did you get stressed out about the situation, frustrated, or do you just kept your head down and went forward?
Luckily, I hadn't really thought that deeply about it.
Okay.
So I was just pleased to have employment. I never asked myself in the first sort of 10, 15, 20 years of working, I never asked myself, do you actually like this music? I didn't sort of pose those questions to myself. Maybe as you get older, you get a bit more philosophical and you start wondering what it's all about and what is the point of all this and what have I done with my life kind of questions, which you don't, when you're 17, you don't worry about that sort of thing.
No. But that's something you're pondering about nowadays. What's the point of drumming or?
Yeah, well, what's the point of any of it? Are you enjoying it? Are you making a meaningful contribution? Are you pioneering anything? Are you playing anything new? Are you just regurgitating same old stuff you've done for years and years? Are you progressing as a player? Are you in, interesting musical situations that inspire you or challenge you or things that you enjoy? Those kind of questions come to you, in later life.
Yeah. But so how do you progress as a drummer, as yourself, who's been playing for many, many years?
Well, you keep practicing. I've been practicing today. I've been practicing yesterday. I was practicing the day before. I practice every day. I don't want to stand still. I want to improve. I find things I can't play and I practice them until I can play them. Then I truly have progressed. Whether I might use that particular thing or not is another matter. There are days where I just improvise and do creative things. I might film myself playing something interesting. I might try and transcribe some things that have come out of an improvisation. And at some point in the future, I might actually use that rhythm or a variation of that rhythm on some track or, or some writing session.
So how does your practice routine look? Is there a specific thing you always do?
No,
No?
there's not something I always do. I've got a number of different systems and I've got piles and piles and piles of manuscript of ideas that I've written down that I want to develop, that I want to work on, that I want to evolve into something. I could easily just pick up a handful of manuscript and look through it, and within a minute I would think, oh yeah, that was something I was working on last year. Let me have a go at that and see if I can do something new with it.
Oh, that's cool.
That that, that would be a creative sort of section. If I'm working purely on technique, then I've probably got some predetermined exercises that I want to achieve.
Right.
some technical goal with.
So if it's musical or technical, you said that's the question you ask yourself, so to speak, before practicing.
Yeah, or I might just sit on the drums and start playing, and then it will sort of take me one way or another. I tend to find nowadays, lots of short sessions are better than one long session. So I might play the drums for 20 minutes, and then I might stop for a couple of hours. I might come back and do another 20 minutes, and then I might stop for another couple of hours. I might play for 30 minutes, and actually it's kind of focused, concentrated, useful 20 minutes rather than just waste a lot of time and flap about for hours and hours endlessly going nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. Um, I actually want to ask you about Porcupine Tree, because I guess everyone wants to talk to you about Porcupine Tree, but uh, I remember when I just discovered you guys, there was some 10 years ago now, I think. And I just read this quote from Steven Wilson when you joined the band. And he said, hopefully this is also a correct quote from Wikipedia. But he said that you, Gavin, was the final piece of that equation when you joined, and you totally raised the bar in terms of not just the drumming but the musicianship right throughout the band, and everyone
Right.
was listening to you saying, "Fuck, wow, we really need to step up our game." So that was really a nice quote. So just how was your experience joining the band and doing In Absentia?
Well, yeah, it was an interesting kind of project for me. Obviously, I knew Richard Barbieri. We'd worked together on a few different projects, and when the previous drummer Chris Maitland left, Richard called me and said, "Would you come to New York and play on an album as a session?" So I did exactly that, and they liked the way I played. They liked what I did to the music, and invited me to join the band. So it was quite a successful project, at least at that time.
Yeah, for sure. Because you played with them, how many albums did you do? Was it 4 or 5 in total?
Well, there's 4 studio albums. There's an EP which came off the back of Fear of a Blank Planet. I think, is it a double album, The Incident? I can't even remember. There's quite a lot of stuff, and there's lots of live albums and a couple of live DVDs. There's quite a lot of stuff.
Mm. And are you still in touch with any of the guys from the band, or you just on separate levels now, or projects, should I
No,
say?
I'm in touch with all of them,
Oh, okay.
and we still see each other. Steve lives quite close to me, so we meet up quite regularly.
Nice. And is there any talks about playing together again, or you're just on different
No, not at
various
the
paths?
moment.
No. Um, cool. Just coming down to my last question here. Do you have a favorite failure that set you up for later success? As in something you thought was a failure, but it turned out to be a success.
Um, well, I can't think of one. Um, I mean, I realised that quite early on, you never know when a break is about to happen for you. I took every job and every gig and session that I did really seriously, because I knew that although the session might be horrible, there could be someone on that session that might, invite me into another situation, and that did come true quite a lot. I did some sessions with people, and I thought, "Oh, this is nasty stuff," and then maybe the guitar player a couple of years later called me to do something that was much nicer, and he remembered me from that, session a couple of years ago. So it could be that you're just playing in a pub with some friends, and there's someone in the pub watching you who, is going to ask you to work with them. So, I I was never kind of, all the jobs I did, I never sat there bored or kind of yawning, thinking, "Wow, this is so below me. What am I doing?" I gave it everything on every job. That I always had that kind of work ethic that I wanted to give it my best shot, even if I was playing dinner music in a hotel to a bunch of people who, whilst they were eating their dinner, I played it the absolute 100% best I could play at that time for that musical situation. I never once ever sat there thinking, "Oh God, I could play so much better than this. I could be doing so much better music than this." It was the job at hand, so I got on and did whatever I could to the best of my ability.
Yeah. That's perfect advice, actually. And yeah, it's good to hear for myself, and I think others will feel the same.
Good.
So thank you very much, Gavin. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Okay, Nicholas.
Take care, man.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you very much, Gavin, for coming onto the podcast. It was awesome talking to you. And I hope you, the listener, enjoyed it as much as I did. And please, before you leave, give a rating and a comment. If you like the podcast, so iTunes can work its algorithmic magic and help spread the word. And again, don't forget the free guide on youraudiosolutions.com. Check it out, my 3 tested ways to increase your client base. Go check it, and I'll see you next week.